and it hits me, oh my gosh, this is that triangle.
You know, there's explanation for everything that occurred in the Rendlesham-Pars incident that doesn't involve aliens at all.
It was completely silent. It comes right over our heads.
He saw a classic flying saucer really standing in the clearing.
He turned over to my father and held his hand, and he looked in his eyes and he said, "We're not alone."
Welcome to Podcast UFO for our live show. We're live every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on podcastufo.com. During the show, feel free to participate live in our chat room. And don't forget to like us on our very active Facebook page.
Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Martin Willis, your host. And we have Alejandro coming up in just a moment with UFO updates. Our guest this evening is going to be Tom Carey and Don Schmitt. And we're going to actually talk about the Roswell alien slide situation that happened back on May 5th a year ago. And then we'll talk about other things as well. We have a couple of questions that came in that people want to talk about, different subjects besides just that. So if you support the show, I want to thank you very much. And if you can't support the show but still want to hear the whole entire show, you can listen live every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on podcastufo.com or on PSN Radio. And you can also listen to the entire show as a podcast on the Dark Matter Digital Network the following night, Thursday, at 10 to midnight Eastern Standard Time. And so that's it for now. Alejandro, how are you?
I am good. Yep. How are you doing?
Everything is fine up here on the mountain.
Good.
Yeah,
that is good to know. Yeah, that's really interesting. You just told me before the show you're the third highest building in Cumberland County. Is that what it is?
Yeah, that's right.
Huh.
Third highest house. The reason I brought that up, we might as well fall right into the story, if you would. There was a UFO sighting. And last week I asked you if there's any July 4th sightings, and here was one right here.
Yeah.
And you want to talk about it?
Yeah. I mean, I think you even said, is there any July 4th sightings? And I was like, oh, I haven't heard any. And you're like, well, you just posted one today, dummy. And I was like, oh, yeah, okay. So, and I guess I did. So you were right. So, yeah, this is a video. It's a great video, but it's probably a drone. In fact, Roger Marsh posted it. So it was a MUFON report. And the video says, main video, UFO or drone. And, of course, if Roger Marsh is saying UFO or drone, it's probably because he thinks it is a drone. Now, there's some very bright lights in the sky. And even the person who saw it thought, well, maybe it is a drone. But he felt it was very sophisticated because it seemed high up in the sky and everything. But it's a good video. I mean, this guy used a 60-time HD zoom video camera, and it really gets in there. And while you can't see the body of the craft, it does look like, lights on each side, and you can almost see kind of the camera harness area. People probably are familiar with that. The thing that comes down in the middle of the drone that holds the camera. It looks like you can see that reflected in there. So, but that was on July 4th. They took the video at 9:23. And, a lot of people are using drones to film the fireworks, and I think they're even putting their drones in danger just to get the shots. And I don't blame them because the shots are awesome. You can now. Last year there were only a few, but this year there were more. These really cool videos of fireworks from drones.
Now, this particular drone. Oh, by the way, it was the reason we brought up Cumberland County is because this was nearby in Cumberland County.
This was in Cumberland County, right?
And, so I could have seen it if I was standing on my roof, maybe, possibly. Yep. You never know.
So, how do you even know your building is the third highest?
Well,
did someone come by it, and excuse me?
Well, no, the building, 2 buildings above me was for sale, and touted all over the real estate ads that it was the highest house in Cumberland County. Mm-hmm. So I figured, I'm just 100 or 200 feet lower, so I have to be. It's close enough to be a fact.
Wow. Well, I mean, is that a big deal? Is that much higher than other houses?
It's one of the bigger mountains in Maine. I don't know how. I may be totally wrong about that, but it's one of the bigger mountains around. And I found this property because I wanted to go hiking, and I drove right by it, and I said, "Wow, that's a very weird looking property." And it was just one of those things. So it's a nice hiking area. I have trails right outside of my house, and it's very nice. But I guess we're a little bit off topic here. Yeah, a little bit. However, to get back on topic, I did post another July 4th story for you today. All right. Where was that?
It actually wasn't for you. It was in Oregon and Washington. It began in Portland, and it was all the way back in 1947. So why does this case matter? What's the big deal? It's because it was, I think, the very first Project Blue Book investigation that was labeled an unknown. So some people may be aware that there are around 700. Now, there's different reports that claim different numbers as far as the cases that Blue Book received that they were not able to solve. They say they were able to solve most of them. However, of course, the meat of the issue is what cases they were not able to resolve. And those are the most interesting. And 701 actually is a film that James Fox is currently working on based on, one of the statements that there were 701 unknowns. But the number's in a bit of flex. But this, I believe, is the first one. It was July 4th, 1947. So around the time of the famous Roswell incident.
Wow. Now, I wonder if James is going to actually include that particular sighting in that movie.
He should, but I don't know that they did. I haven't got a clear idea of what the movie necessarily is about. So from what I understand, they're looking at some of the cases because these cases are great. I'll be talking about or posting another one here soon because in our magazine, Open Minds magazine, I had a section where I wrote about some of these unknowns, but from what I understand, their films also including other stuff. So I'm not clear that they are covering just unknowns.
And Torme is working with him as well, right?
Yeah, he is.
Yeah.
He is another producer. So we had him out, which is really fascinating. We had him out at the Travis Walton event last November, which was the anniversary event to the Travis Walton incident, and he had some speakers, and Tracy Torme was there to talk about his involvement with the 701 film, and so was James Fox. So that was a lot of fun, and he's very interesting.
Does he sing?
Not that I'm aware of.
I bet he gets asked that all the time.
Why would he get asked that?
Because his daddy.
And who is? This is for the listeners.
Mel.
Yeah, Mel Torme. But not everybody, especially the younger people, probably even know who Mel Torme is.
That's right.
I can't even say what he sings. Do you know, what was one of his original songs?
Something about a cat up in a tree or something like that?
Really?
Yeah.
There's a cat up in the tree. Scooby-Doo-bop-bop-a-doo-boo.
That was actually pretty good. I think he did the skiddly-bop-doo-doo a few times. So, yeah, not bad. Not bad for your first time.
I know he's a singer, and I've heard him, but I can't even think of what his songs might have been.
Well, that wasn't
Although I just came back from Vegas, and they have a Mel Torme, Avenue there.
Yeah, that wasn't that far off, I will tell you that.
Yeah, I kind of am familiar with kind of what he does. So
Yeah. It's pretty good.
Want to hear about the UFO?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Right. Yeah. Let's do that.
So This was actually early on. It was Project Sign at first. Some people may know when they started investigating UFOs in late 1947, and then it changed into Project Grudge and then Project Blue Book. But we know them as Project Blue Book, and the final reports were listed as final Project Blue Book reports. But this was labeled an unknown, and mainly because the witnesses were mostly police officers. Although this is all together in one Blue Book file, the Blue Book cases were all called incidents. And this one actually includes several different incidents, so essentially all the different witnesses on this day. It began in Portland at about 1 p.m., supposedly it was a clear, warm day, and one of the police officers, Kenneth McDowell, was in the parking lot behind the police precinct feeding some pigeons. It's another thing I like about this, that you just, can think of this police officer enjoying the day, feeding the pigeons, when all of a sudden the pigeons seemed startled, and they flew off. And he's thinking, what the heck is going on? So he looks around, and he sees these strange objects in the air he called 5 large flying discs. He said they were dipping up and down in an oscillating motion. So he notified dispatch, and they sent out an alert. At the same time, another police officer in Milwaukee, Oregon, was also seeing the objects. He said he saw 3 of these discs. Meanwhile, back in Portland, Patrolman Earl Patterson, who was a former Air Corps pilot, heard the radio alert about the objects. He said he spotted one of them that was, as he put it, moving faster than any speed he had ever seen. So faster than anything he'd ever seen move before. He described it as an aluminum disc, or possibly having an eggshell white color. He estimated the object was flying at about 30,000 feet. At the same time as this sighting, another sighting by patrolman Walter Lissy and Robert Ellis, they stopped their car, and they said they spotted 3 flat, round, white discs flying at approximately 40,000 feet. And then this is kind of interesting. So then in Vancouver, Washington, several Shepherd and Clark County Sheriff deputies were listening to the radio, and they heard the report. So they ran outside, and they said they also saw the objects. They said they saw 20 to 30 objects in a V formation. Of course, these could have been geese, but they said that they heard a low humming sound. The Oregon Journal actually picked up the story and wrote an article of it where they included a lot of other sightings and witnesses. So there are quite a few witnesses. And in the end, the Blue Book report noted there is no astronomical explanation for this incident, nor for numerous others which occurred in and near Portland on the 4th of July, 1947. There was someone who did an analysis. I can't remember who this guy was, but there was an investigator who looked into it who suggested that possibility exists, that these were pieces of aluminum that appeared to flutter in the air, giving the illusion of being fast-moving discs. However, he did note the above is not to be regarded as a very likely explanation, but only a possibility. So he was looking for some kind of connection with the July 4th festivities that might have been going on. But, of course, these were earlier in the day, and these were daylight sightings. So wow. It's a great case. It's a really cool case, yeah.
Especially when you have all those officers. Now, Now, this happened, of course, before the Roswell incident, but after the Kenneth Arnold incident. And so there was a lot of things going on at that time, right? Am I right about that? Quite a few sightings.
Oh, you're absolutely right about that. Yeah, there were quite a lot of sightings, and, we don't hear about a whole lot of them. At the Roswell Museum, actually, they have some of those sightings. In fact, they have a section dedicated to other sightings from that weekend. And I've always thought it would be an interesting story to write about all of the sightings that happened during that July 4th period because there were a lot of them.
Yeah.
This one included. Like I said, this was printed in the Oregon paper. And, in the famous Roswell audio, you can hear him say, perhaps we have resolved the mystery of these flying discs being seen all over the country. So, so there were sightings going on all over the place.
Yeah, so weird that happened all at once. And then 1952, I think it was another really big year for UFOs. But it was a little bit of a lag in between the years, I think.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say that. There were sightings the whole time. It's just there are waves of sightings. There's periods of time where there are more sightings than others. And certainly the 50s was one of those. So eventually here I'll write a story because I'm starting to take some of the stories from our magazine to put them online just because they were a lot of work. And some of our magazines now we don't have any left to even sell.
Wow.
So I want to get these stories out there. In fact, I wrote a story on the 1952 sighting over Washington, D.C., and I include a bit there that was part of many sightings, not just, Washington, D.C. It's just what's important about Washington, D.C. is that the Blue Book guys were there, and they actually went to the tower at the airport and were able to witness, everything that happened, scrambling of the jets and everything. So,
wow, I had no idea that.
Yeah, really cool case.
There. Wow.
So I'll write that up. The best, telling of all of these Blue Book stories is Captain Ruppelt, his book Report on Flying Saucers. So, which people should check. What's funny about that book is he was, the first Project Blue Book chief. He started at the end of Project Grudge with all of this, and he essentially wrote the book saying, here's the report I would have given if anybody would have bothered to ask. But I think from his book especially, you really get an idea that the topic was a hot potato. They weren't looking necessarily for answers, but just looking on how to keep these situations from becoming public disasters, PR issues. And so you can really see in his book that the main concern was dealing with the PR aspects of all of this, and less, unfortunately, dealing with what is really going on. So is anybody in the Air Force looking at what's really going on? I don't know. But, we talked recently about those OPREP 3 reports. It seems like those reports went somewhere, and maybe there is somewhere down the chain of people looking at and taking these reports more seriously. But
I'm sure there is. The guest I had last week, Rich Hoffman,
And it hits me, oh my gosh, this is that triangle.
There's explanation for everything that occurred in the Rendlesham Forest incident that doesn't involve aliens at all.
It was completely silent. It comes right over our heads.
He saw a classic flying saucer really standing in the clearing.
He turned over to my father and held his hand, and he looked in his eyes, and he said, we're not alone.
Welcome to Podcast UFO for our live show. We're live every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on podcastufo.com. During the show, feel free to participate live in our chat room. And don't forget to like us on our very active Facebook page.
Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Martin Willis, your host. And we have Alejandro coming up in just a moment with UFO updates. Our guest this evening is going to be Tom Carey and Don Schmitt. And we're going to actually talk about the Roswell alien slide situation that happened back on May 5th a year ago. And then we'll talk about other things as well. We have a couple of questions that came in.
And it hits me, oh my gosh, this is that triangle.
There's explanation for everything that occurred in the Rendlesham Forest incident that doesn't involve aliens at all.
It was completely silent. It comes right over our heads.
He saw a classic flying saucer really standing in the clearing.
He turned over to my father and held his hand, and he looked in his eyes, and he said, we're not alone.
Welcome to Podcast UFO for our live show. We're live every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on podcastufo.com. During the show, feel free to participate live in our chat room. And don't forget to like us on our very active Facebook page.
Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Martin Willis, your host. And we have Alejandro coming up in just a moment with UFO updates. Our guest this evening is going to be Tom Carey and Don Schmitt. And we're going to actually talk about the Roswell alien slide situation that happened back on May 5th a year ago. And then we'll talk about other things as well. We have a couple of questions that came in that people want to talk about, different subjects besides just that. So if you support the show, I want to thank you very much. And if you can't support the show but still want to hear the whole entire show, you can listen live every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on podcastufo.com or on PSN Radio. And you can also listen to the entire show as a podcast on the Dark Matter Digital Network the following night, Thursday, at 10 to midnight Eastern Standard Time. And so that's it for now. Alejandro, how are you?
I am good. Yep. How are you doing?
Everything is fine up here on the mountain.
Good.
Yeah,
That is good to know. Yeah, that's really interesting. You just told me before the show you're the third highest building in Cumberland County. Is that what it is?
Yeah, that's right.
Huh.
Third highest house.
That
and
is so
the reason I
interesting.
brought that up, we might as well fall right into the story, if you would. There was a UFO sighting. And last week I asked you if there's any July 4th sightings, and here was one right here.
Yeah.
And you want to talk about it?
Yeah. I mean, I think you even said, is there any July 4th sightings? And I was like, oh, I haven't heard any. And you're like, well, you just posted one today, dummy. And I was like, oh, yeah, okay. So, and I guess I did. So you were right. So, yeah, this is a video. It's a great video, but it's probably a drone. In fact, Roger Marsh posted it. So it was a MUFON report. And the video says, main video, UFO or drone. And, of course, if Roger Marsh is saying UFO or drone, it's probably because he thinks it is a drone. Now, there's some very bright lights in the sky. And even the person who saw it thought, well, maybe it is a drone. But he felt it was very sophisticated because it seemed high up in the sky and everything. But it's a good video. I mean,
He showed us the slides. Of course, I contacted Don because, as Don knows, most of the people who contact us first before we contact them, from our own efforts, they usually in the past have turned out to be not what they had billed themselves as, and it would usually had an unhappy ending. So we are naturally cautious up front, and we had to sign this before we saw the slides. We had to sign this non-disclosure agreement, that we wouldn't talk about them or go online and email and stuff like that. So
what year? How far in advance was this to the May?
This 3 years. This was 3 years before the May 5th last year event in Mexico City. 3 years. And so he said, okay, we signed them and sent them back. And so he then sent us there were 2 slides of the same body. And right away, to me, it matched the description, the various descriptions of the eyewitnesses from 1947 and thereafter who had seen either the bodies or what we call the live one, the one survivor. I was stunned because it matched perfectly those descriptions. So at that time, I asked him, what are you looking for? What do you want to do here with this? He says, well, I'm not looking for money, which turned out to be other than what happened. And he said, what do we do? And so Don and I put together a plan to authenticate the slides.
Tom?
Yep.
Tom, we're having a little bit of issue with your Skype. So, Don, can you pick it up from here, please? We'll try you again in a little bit, Tom.
Well, first of all, how do I sound?
You sound perfect.
Okay, great. We never, or at least I know I for a fact, never tried in any way to associate the slides or any images thereof with Roswell. In fact, if anything, I took strong issue with anybody who tried to label them the Roswell slides, infer that they were connected to Roswell. I'm going to quote, it was before the event in Mexico City. It was in the Express newspaper from the United Kingdom. And I'm going to quote what I said at that time. Now, this is before Mexico City, where I stated, while Mr. Schmitt argued, quote, "No, it's not physical evidence, and it's important to understand when a picture has value. Usually a photo can begin to be considered supporting evidence only when time, location, and the photographer are known. In addition, it's vital to know what instrument recorded the data. We don't have the camera or any other information about how the slides of the body were taken. The other claims are all based on speculation, trying to make the slides and the Ray's history, supposedly the people who took the picture, fit into the narrative of the Roswell story," end quote. So I was always arguing against any connection to Roswell. I always qualified everything with if. If the slides checked out, and it was one of the first things after we were first shown one of the slides, that the slides would have to be dated. And we relied on the historian at Eastman Kodak in Rochester, New York, to do just that. So when the slides were dated circa 1947, well, obviously it got our attention. Now, I can't, and neither can Tom, we can't verify which of the slides were dated. Because one of the things that at least I became rather suspect of was the fact that none of us were allowed to be there. In fact, we were told repeatedly that it was the very historians at Kodak that were saying, we are limiting the number of people who can be in the room. We are limiting the number of people who can be there at the time of our analysis, which we found a little suspect.
That is strange.
And yet, again, we saw a written and a signed analysis report from the historian at Eastman Kodak. It doesn't describe the slides that were tested with, that were analyzed, just that the slides that were provided were around, as far as were dated to be around circa 1947.
They actually said 1947 on their own?
Circa 47, 48 at the latest.
I see. Okay. One of the things that, Don, I don't know if you recall this, but I had you on prior to this and questioned you because I'd heard the rumor going around about these slides. And one of the things... I do remember that. You do remember that? Not like Tom, you do remember. Okay. But one of the things you said is you said that these should definitely go to the public instead of the UFO community. You thought it was very important and there should be due diligence, which you just more or less maintain right now. So with all of this going on, how did the whole event come about, and who was it Jaime that just took this whole thing by the reins and just said, look, this is what we're going to do? How did that all happen?
We were in the midst of our fourth archaeological dig in New Mexico. That was in October of 2013. And there was a British film crew that we allowed to film on site, as well as a Dutch film crew from Denmark, as well as a Mexican film crew, which was led by Jaime Maussan. And there was some initial discussion about the images, about the photographs, about the slides. And Jaime immediately, made a number of proposals, and he wanted to be introduced to the owners of the slides. Well, we merely signed a non-disclosure as far as not to provide any imagery, any copies, anything regarding the original images. But as far as introducing them to anybody else, if they were willing to talk, we were willing to set it up, which we did. So we arranged for Jaime Maussan to actually phone or be part of a phone conference with the owners of the slides. And that's when it fell totally in his hands, as he made numerous offers, about possible production out of Hollywood, and he brought up Univision and a number of Spanish television networks that might be interested. And from there, it developed into putting on a full-scale event, a full show down in Mexico City.
Now, were there, between you and Tom, were there red flags going up at this time? I mean, were you feeling like, whoa, this is, someone's taking control of this? And how did that make you feel at that point?
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you sound good, yes.
Okay. Up until that point, up until Mexico City, see, we had the slides authenticated as being pristine by the Kodak historian. He also authenticated that it had not been photoshopped or altered. So what was on the slide was something that was taken in the 1947 to 49, 48 time frame. And the body on the slide looked like no other body that I had ever seen in my anthropological, archaeological background. So as far as red flags, up until May 5th, because it passed every test, we did due diligence for 3 years trying to authenticate them. And the one piece that we haven't talked about yet is this little placard that was at the foot of the body that had a script. They had something written in script on this placard that we tried for 3 years to decipher or read. I tried. I couldn't do it. We sent it to David Rudiak, who worked on the Ramey memo. He couldn't read it. We sent it to others, even professional organizations who had better equipment, we presume, than we had. They couldn't read it. They all got back to us, this is unreadable. So because we felt that whatever's on that placard will be the key to telling us what that body represents. So it couldn't be read. The slides had been authenticated as genuine. All the other slides in the collection that I saw were from the mid to late 1940s time frame. You could tell by the dress that the people in the photos were taking, and by the automobiles that were shown. They were all from that time period. So for me, everything added up to what I thought those slides represented, was a body from the Roswell crash. That's what it meant to me up until May the 5th. As far as warning flags, I didn't really, since it passed through all these steps, At that time, I didn't have any because everything looked like it was legit. But the placard, we tried everything. We could not read it, so we went forward with the May 5th event in Mexico City.
But keeping in mind that each and every time that there was another attempt at reading the placard, we had to rely, for not having direct access to the slides, we had to rely on what we were told were high-resolution scans from the owners. And now we look back, and whether it was even their claim that even Adobe, that they had people at Adobe that actually tried to read the placard. And then after the Mexico City event, well, then it turned out, well, it's just a friend of somebody who worked at Adobe. That type of double talk. And then realizing as we had them resend different scans to other people, and they were different quality scans, and all of a sudden what appeared to be script writing all of a sudden became the original block lettering on the placard. So we then saw the manipulation. We saw where they were washing out the lettering on the placard. They were, creating as far as a different effect in some of the scans they provided us. For whatever their ends, whatever their motives were, we were not receiving, and the people who we were referring the placard scans for hopeful reading were not receiving an accurate portrayal of what was on that placard.
So,
I mean, I will state that right now for a fact.
Yeah.
Also, we had Tony Bergalia, an associate of ours, an independent investigator himself, do a search on the internet because he has all these tools for searching out things on the internet that I certainly don't have, and I don't think Don has either. And he looked at thousands of images of mummies because it had been suggested by others, well, this has got to be a mummy. And so he looked at thousands and could not come up with a match up until May 5th. And so that was another piece of the due diligence that we had done. Another part of it was that I contacted anthropologists, physical anthropologists and archaeologists to take a look at this slide that we were permitted to look at, but because of the signed statement that we wouldn't reveal things, we could not show them an actual slide. We had to use the slide that Don remembers this, that Adam Dew, the friend of the owners, put on the internet in a sort of a promo for this upcoming event. He put on a slide that was shown at an angle, and that's all that I could reveal to these anthropologists. And the problem was they always wanted to know, well, what's the context of this slide, and which I tried not to bring up, because as soon as they heard the word UFO or Roswell, they said, whoop, so I'm sorry, I can't do this, goodbye. So that's what we ran into as far as trying to get official anthropological statements regarding the slides. And we were able to get a fellow up in Canada who I have great respect for still, that he would go on the record. And he said he's never seen anything like it. To him, it's not human. And I still have great respect for him. Very intelligent fellow, a physical anthropologist out of the University of Toronto. And so this is what we had going into May 5th last year. Oh, one other thing, Martin. Mm-hmm. Don lives up in Wisconsin. I live in Pennsylvania. The owner lives on the West Coast, and Adam Dew He lived in Indiana. And Jaime Maussan, of course, is down in Mexico City. So the logistics of this were very, very difficult I believe we all got together once in Chicago, and that's the only time we ever were all in the same room at the same time.
Were you there with the slides themselves, or
yes,
did you actually had the slides in the room? And who was holding on to them at this whole time?
Well, that was Adam Dew.
Adam Dew. And
yes.
One of the questions I had thought of is what has become of Adam Dew at this point? And I know he was doing a documentary. And where is he now on this whole thing?
They
Last night I had even checked their website. It hadn't even been updated in almost 8 months. So it would appear as though they have faded away into the woodwork. They took their money and ran, and were able to, whether intentional or not, or so often it's suggested that even some of the big UFO hoaxers throughout the course of history, that they merely had a simple sighting, and they developed such an interest, such a curiosity from the public that they felt the need to provide more. And as a result, they got caught up in something that got out of hand, and they were unable to just put a stop to it, put an end to it. And then you insert Jaime Maussan into it with the big production, and then it truly becomes a spectacle in that regard. But the last conversation we had with the owners, we were insisting that the slides would be publicly, presented. They would be made publicly available, and that there would be scans made on site, and then a demonstration as to how all of these experts could have possibly been misled or unable to read the placard as easily as it turned out, that it was legible. So we demanded as far as total transparency, and we were throughout. And the problem always came down to, as Tom has been explaining, well, don't forget, you guys have signed a non-disclosure. Nobody can do anything. Nobody can come out with anything until everything, all the T's are crossed, all the I's are dotted, until everybody is ready. And the biggest lesson I learned myself in all this is that science is far from absolute. For all of the experts, all the anthropologists, all the forensic pathologists, all the experts, so-called experts, who claim that this was the real thing, the genuine article, they were wrong. Or at least as far as what the slides actually represent. Now, one can still argue whether the body contained or presented therein, as far as within the slides, is a 2-year-old mummy or not, a 2-year-old little boy. I mean, that debate is still ongoing, especially down in Mexico.
Yeah, I caught a little bit of that.
But I will not, and I will never forget. It was the day after the Mexico City event, and we were in Jaime Maussan's office. And Tom will remember that even throughout that entire evening, I kept asking, where is the second slide? How come they're not showing the second slide? And as it turns out, the only image that we were ever shown or ever sent of that second slide was a highly cropped, it was enlarged to only show the body. Nothing in the background. And we were in Maussan's office the next day, and I asked Jaime, I said, Jaime, I want to see the second slide. I want to see the entire second slide. And he asked me, why do you need to see it? And I said, Jaime, I want to see the second slide. And he brought it up on screen, and it was, oh my God, that's a museum. I mean, the whole setting when you could see the entire background.
The adjustable shelves and the showcases.
Precise. And before that, we were only shown as it now turns out, a tight, highly cropped image of just the body.
So who do you think? Let's just say, who do you think cropped them?
Can I add something, Martin?
Yes, go ahead.
If the slide, the original slide that was shown to us, if that hadn't resembled so closely what had been described to us by eyewitnesses of the Roswell bodies, I would have walked and not spent any time on it. If the historian from Kodak did not authenticate the slides as being genuine from the 1947 time period, I would have walked. If he did not authenticate them as to that the fact that they weren't photoshopped or manipulated, if he did not authenticate that, I would have walked.
But Tom, as I also mentioned while you were off the air for a few minutes, they did not allow any of us to be present during the dating process.
That was the Kodak fellow's request, as I remember.
Right, and as a result, we don't even know what slides they looked at.
You know,
we weren't there, so
yeah.
I'm involved in the art field, the antiques and art field, and have been involved in authenticating some important pieces of art. And it's the same way. They have certain artists like Picasso and a few others have juries, and the jurors meet like 4 or 5 times a year, whatever, and they will hold the objects, the artwork in their hands, and they don't want anyone in the room. It's very similar. And this whole situation, in a way, kind of reminds me of someone authenticating a painting by someone like Picasso or something like that. And, you know, people have been fooled by really good forgers of artwork. So, you know, we're all human. In my opinion,
and if one of the organizations or persons that we sent the placard out to read, if one of them had deciphered it and said, "Oh, it's talking about a 2-year-old boy or a mummy or something," I would have walked.
Of course, we would. Yeah.
But none of that took place. Every step was overcome, and when we got to May 5th, everything looked. We took it as far as we could. Everything looks copacetic. Let's go forward. And when I saw it was a day or two later after May 5th when I saw that they used a program called deblur or something or other, and I said, "This can't be this can't be real," because we tried so hard to sharpen that up to be able to read it, and here somebody you can read it. This can't be real, and I'm still in a little bit of disbelief about it, but nevertheless that's what happened, and I was in real shock.
Well, it has to do with the quality of the scan that was deblurred and the quality that was given to the experts. You said someone from Adobe or someone related to Adobe. They weren't getting a clear enough scan, obviously, and there was in my opinion, and this is just a theory, the person that was providing these scans to someone to do this analysis, they knew what they were doing. They weren't giving the high enough quality scan, so it could be deblurred.
Well, that's what's suggested, of course. That's what's suggested.
And then we're talking deception. Then we are talking about intentional. We're talking about somebody who made sure that these images of the placard were not deciphered, were not deblurred. We saved all the email from Dr. David Rudiak, where he said, this beats me. and for all of his splendid work on the Rainey Memo, as Tom mentioned earlier. And who are we going to believe? I mean, here's Rudiak, one of the best, and he's saying, I can't make out a single letter.
That's
and
right.
Then you multiply that over, a half a dozen other experts, and we're listening to the owners say that even Adobe, they can't read, this placard. So unfortunately, again, as Tom described, everything was pointing towards something that not only regarding the placard that was undecipherable, and then all of the scientists involved were saying not human. Whether it was the size of a skull, whether it was the lack of rotator cuffs in the shoulder, whether it was the decreased number of ribs in the rib cage, the lack of a sternum as far as the breastbone, there's no pelvic bone, the carpal bones in the wrist and the ankles are different. So we're listening to, again, all of the experts tell us why this may indeed be something legitimate.
Now, were there experts too that just said, "Oh, that's a mummy"? I mean, were there experts that came back and just said that and possibly were ignored by the owners of the slides?
Well, after the fact, who we didn't contact, but the ones that we contacted, I was contacting physical anthropologists, human physical anthropologists, and also primatologists, and the one that did talk to me, well, there were two. The one said according to her, it was not a non-human primate, like a Old World monkey or a New World monkey or an ape or something. It's not one of those. So we sort of knew that already. But she had a PhD in the physical anthropology, so and she knew what she was talking about. So. Another fellow was a top, and I had a long conversation with him. He was out of the University of Chicago, and he said that he wouldn't go on the record, but he said that it was not a mummy, that we should be looking in the area of human genetic deformities that affect children, and that's a whole another field, and so I looked in that direction. I didn't see anything that was close to a match, but that's what he said. That he didn't know, but he just suggested that possibly it might be something along those lines. But I never did find anything that was close. So that's what we were faced with. Also, there was this. Combination physical anthropologist, archaeologist that lived in Wisconsin, about a 2-hour drive from Don, and his website said he was really interested. If you have a question that you don't have the answer to in this area of archaeology and physical anthropology, please let him know, because that's his bailiwick. Well, I emailed him a couple times. He never responded. So I finally called him, and I did get a hold of him, and he was interested in this until he said, "Okay, what's the context?" And I said, "Well, it has to do with possibly the famous Roswell case in 1947."
I'm sorry, we have a caller on. We have a caller on. Welcome, caller.
Just getting
caller, please mute your computer, if you would.
It is muted.
Oh, okay, very good. You have a question for our guests tonight?
Well, I just think they should hold their heads in shame. I mean, I took one look at that photograph and saw a mummy. How could you possibly believe that something that came out of someone's attic of an old lady and an old man be possibly an alien being? It's absolutely absurd. Is it just about the fame and the money with you guys? Well,
we did research the owners, the original owners of the slides. He was a oil geologist, whose territory included.
That doesn't mean he's going to take a photograph of
listen.
Okay.
No, I do want. I do want to listen.
Talk.
No, I want to listen, but you stopped talking, so I started to talk back.
I didn't stop talking. I was in mid-sentence. We did research the original owners of the slide. The wife was a high-powered lawyer out of Midland, Texas. Her husband was a exploration field oil geologist whose territory encompassed southeastern New Mexico. So that was very suggestive. And during the time period in the late 40s. So everything added up to this. To me, it looked like a genuine, something genuine.
Okay. So what's a lawyer got to do with Roswell? What's a geologist got to do with Roswell when this is being covered up by the military?
You're assuming that, at least in my case, that we were trying to draw any connection to Roswell. I want to point out, the very people that took out the domain on the internet of Roswell Slides were the skeptics. We did not. They made sure that anybody who goes to Roswell Slides will always see their full account of what took place. They are the ones who immediately labeled these the Roswell Slides. We never did.
Was it not then time to pull out and say this isn't right? Then, if that was the case, would it not have been a better time to pull out when people are doing that?
Well, certainly in retrospect, but in my case, I was again relying on the scientists. I was relying on the dating analysis of Eastman Kodak. I was relying on all of the anthropologists who were saying that this body was not human. And I was also relying on the honesty and the credibility of the owners of the slides. And that's where it all fell apart. Now, I want you at least to just hear me out for a second. In the course of investigating Roswell, which is unlike, and you have to concede yourself, unlike all other UFO cases, which may involve nothing more than a sighting, if possible, a number of independent witnesses, at best some photographs, some video, possibly some documents, if it concerns the military, that type of thing. But Roswell encompasses all of the above, and more so because you're also talking about the possibility of physical evidence, physical remains. And as Tom knows, we have had more than our share of people who have claimed that they have had physical evidence, photographs, film, artifacts, debris, that type of thing. And this is the first time that we ever essentially jumped the gun.
Can I just say, I want to thank you for coming on, because you're brave to do so, because a lot of people are very, very upset about having spent the money they did on what they saw. And I just want to say thanks that you've actually just stood up for yourselves and stuff, because that's what it's about. And the fact that you're doing that is proving the fact that you have the same upset as everyone else has. So I'll leave it at that, and thank you so much for your time.
Well, we thank you, and thank you for as far as being honest enough as far as to still express your concern. And your concerns presently are now our concerns.
Okay.
Very good.
Thank you. Thanks, Martin.
Thank you. Thank you, Doc.
Thanks,
is your
Martin.
name.
Bye-bye.
Yes. Yeah. One of the things I just thought about and came up on the message board, and by the way, anyone can call in. That number 603-967-4030 is when they say something like this happens, they always say the old saying is follow the money. And I know there wasn't a huge amount of money, but there was a potential for a lot of money. And so what do you say to that phrase when you say follow the money? Where does the money go on this?
Well, we felt that, like I said, up until May 5th of last year, we felt that this was the real deal, that we had finally found, we call it, although it's not physical evidence like a piece of metal or something like that, we thought that this was something so unique, it almost equaled physical evidence because you had a photograph, a color photograph of a alien body that I believe the most likely scenario was that it was recovered from Roswell. I know Don disagrees with that, but that was my conclusion. And so we felt that it warranted something special other than just to hold a news conference down at the UFO Museum that most people probably wouldn't see or that nobody would pay attention to. So Jaime suggested this big event at the National Auditorium in Mexico City, held 10,000 people. I think 8,000 showed up. And we felt it was the event itself was warranted because of the information we believed at the time that we had. So I don't know what was charged for admission. I know we had a live stream that went around the world that broke down, unfortunately. And as far as the money trail, there wasn't much of it, but it didn't come our way. Don and I can attest.
Well, we did not receive a dime of the gate of the paid admission. We did not receive a dime of the live stream, whether international or even domestically. We received what was you considered a standard honorarium for just being there and presenting, in our case, it was a half-hour presentation on Roswell.
Someone just asked on the message board, and I think it's a good question, and I know it has to do with Jaime, but why Mexico?
Don, I guess it was a juxtaposition that we were both Don and I and Jaime and his crew were in the same place at the same time when we brought up this.
We had talked about that already, Tom, when you were off the air as far as during the 2013 dig.
Oh, sorry.
But that's okay. But no, Jaime himself tried with his own contacts here in the States. There was a producer who worked with Fox Television. There was even a meeting in Los Angeles regarding that. So there was an attempt to do something here in the States. And it was failing that then Jaime fell back, obviously, to his own native availabilities. And that's when he chose to do something right in Mexico City.
I see. Now, how many people do you think attended that in Mexico City?
The last number I had heard was about 7,200. Jaime denies that. He says it was less, but that was the number that came out in one of the Mexico City newspapers.
I know someone's going to send me an email.
Just looking around the auditorium, I didn't see many empty seats. So
yeah, I know someone's going to ask me this if I don't ask you. What were the tickets to get? Were they different prices or were they all the same admission?
I think they were different prices. Closer to the stage, the higher they were. But I couldn't tell you what they were.
Any idea, Don?
I think it was anything from 10 to 25. I think was the highest.
Yeah. So you're going to say that at most there was $100,000 at the gate, possibly. Something like that. And with expenses and everything, let's just do the quick math. Someone came out of it with possibly $30,000 to $50,000 after all expenses. I'm just throwing wild numbers out there, but so no one made a ton of money, is what I'm getting at.
Well, Jaime says he lost money. Jaime says he lost.
That would not include the original fee that the owners were paid. So your figures, Martin, as far as about $50,000 of expenses, and then you throw in the amount that was paid to the owners, that covers everything.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Yeah, so you figure around 100,000. So that would be that would be the break even.
I see. Okay. Now, what about Jaime at this point? You know, it's, of course, he's not on the show, and I don't want to say, you know, real negative things. He has no way to defend himself. But he's still on board that this thing is right. And why do you think that he is hanging on to that? Does it have to do, would you have to guess that it's pride, money, or why would he hang on to the idea that this is right? Or do you think he really thinks that?
Well, I've talked to him, I think since May 5th last year. I think I've talked to him a grand total of two times. And I know he had another convocation of medical doctors, and like we did on May 5th. We had one or two experts down there. Well, he had another meeting with a number of medical people, and I think it must have included an anthropologist or two. And according to Jaime, they came to the same conclusion that it wasn't human. So his position is that the placard on the slide that described it said it was a mummified body of a 2-year-old boy. He says that there's a disconnect between that and what the body is on the glass slab. So that's his position, that the placard does not match what's on the glass slab. And
keeping in mind, I mean, here's where we still stand today. The fact that these aren't just anonymous scientists, experts, that are still claiming that this is something extraordinary. That even the second round, as Tom just described, they are additional anthropologists, doctors, forensic experts beyond what who were originally testified in Mexico City just a little over a year ago. But now he has even multiplied the number of experts who still say that the body in the two slides is not human.
All right. Well,
now,
here's I just want to say this.
See, we're not supporting that. We're not. Okay. It's just that how are these people still either being fooled, or were the slides somehow altered? Were they somehow manipulated? Because none of those experts are stepping forward and saying, we were fooled, I was fooled. And now on second thought, or looking at the image again, I now realize that, yes, indeed, it is a 2-year-old child, a mummified child. How can all these people, still be wrong?
One of the questions I have on this whole situation is, what are they looking at? Are they looking at another cropped image? Are they, because Tom, you have a master's in anthropology. When you saw the thing expanded out where you could see the showcase with the adjustable shelves and the ape's head in the background and all that stuff, you must have right away go, oh my God, this is a museum. How can these anthropologists?
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
I did. But after the fact, of course, I had the same reaction that Don had. But before May 5th, I said, well, to me, it looked like an ad hoc setup where they had, it was not a museum piece that they normally had out for general traffic coming through. To me, it looked like an ad hoc setup, the way they had the glass and the stanchion bar holding it up. So that was my thought.
And the fact that the original images we had been provided of the placard clearly appeared to be handwriting.
Yes.
Script. So in other words, something again hastily done, that somebody just took a piece of white cardboard in their regular script writing, wrote down some details about what this body represented.
Well, here's another thought. I'll just devil's advocate here. If I was retrieving a body from Roswell and putting it into a glass case, I'm not going to put any piece of paper like, "Hey, everybody, this is a Roswell alien," or anything like that. Why would anyone put any type of placard at all in front of an alien? I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, of course, this is all hindsight. Well,
sure.
We didn't. Mm-hmm. We believed that, at least I did, that this was some ad hoc showing of this body for unknown reasons, whether they wanted a civilian opinion or something. We even found out that the wife of the geologist, she was friends with Mamie Eisenhower, so they were friends with the Eisenhowers. Maybe they, and at the time Eisenhower was chief of staff of the Army. Maybe there was some connection there. We just didn't know, and it occurred to me, that perhaps the placard was just something. Since we didn't know what was on it, maybe some sort of information that was useful for the moment. That's all I could think of.
All right, now if you were to this may be a hard question, but if you were to point the finger at anyone in this whole situation for what happened, would it be Adam Dew? Would it be Joseph Beeson? And whatever happened to Joseph Beeson?
Well, in retrospect, it does suggest some sort of concoction by the two gentlemen who you just named. But at the time, like I said, it passed all of these threshold tests. Everything looked like it was a go. But in looking back on it now, the fact that someone was able to read the placard apparently with some sort of general ease that we never had, something is not right. Something is not right.
I guess we all need to ask ourselves, if there was no placard in either slide, if we had no placard, where would we be today?
There'd be a lot more arguing.
We'd still be all scratching our heads. I know.
Yeah.
So it's as though, and that's the classic definition of disinformation. In other words, it's intended to lure you, bait you, draw you in. And then after you fall for it, something exposes it as being a fraud, being a hoax, that type of thing. And is that with the placard?
And Martin, Don knows this. On the two slides, the one slide did have the cursive or script writing that Don had mentioned, and that was the one that everybody was working to decipher. Well, on the other slide, it was all whited out, and when I asked about it, I got the answer, well, they must have taken that second shot with a flash bulb. And I said, oh, okay, well, if that's what it was that caused the script to be whited out or appear to be whited out. Well, it turns out that that wasn't the case. That was not the case. That the second slide, and correct me, Don, if I'm wrong here, that they did alter the second slide to white out that.
And when we say they, it's the same people that we both suspect.
Yeah.
And if they could alter that, then what else have they altered? And see, that's why I question which. Keeping in mind too, Martin, that because there was a whole collection of slides, there were original pictures of, Dwight Eisenhower and his brother Lawrence and their wives. I mean, at close proximity, and then the other pictures as far as a Bing Crosby and Clark Gable, as far as at the playing golf and that type of thing, and hunting trips, and these were, and then foreign trips. The suggestion that even as far as that the woman was a pilot and that she may have had security clearance working as far as for the government, that type of thing. So it all kept pointing to somebody who may have rubbed shoulders with the elite, with high officials within the government. But then you throw in these two slides, which, as again described to us by the owners, were found, serendipitously by the sister of one of them, is that they were put aside, they were slit inside the cover of the slide box, as though they were hidden. That
right.
They were, they were not part of the original, but yet they were part of. And in trying to draw that connection, we relied on them in taking them to Rochester, New York, to have them dated. And again, for one, I don't know which slides were dated. I don't know if it was either of the slides with the body displayed. It may have just been one of the other slides from the collection, for all we know.
Right.
See, I think, again, our overall problem was that we wanted to trust the owners. We wanted this to be something legitimate for having failed so many times, for having had so many false alarms, as I was alluding to earlier, for all the times that we had been contacted with all types of promises, because no other UFO case can do that. Only Roswell, or only a possible crash retrieval incident, can promise you a piece of physical evidence, a piece of hardware, a photograph, a piece, of physical remains, body tissue, that type of thing. Only a crash retrieval has that potential. So we constantly have had these carrots waving in front of us. And this one, up to the point that the placard was finally deciphered, looked to be the most promising. For all the times that we have been successful in exposing these other claims, this one we failed.
Yeah, well, that's actually big of you to admit it like that, and I'll follow up with a question on that. But I do want to say one thing that I was shocked about in this whole situation is the lack of media, and I'm going to say thank God, but there was a lack of media. Now, if I would just imagine that if there's going to be a reveal of something that could be an actual extraterrestrial, they would be covered with media. What was up with that?
Well, it was in Mexico City, and in talking to Jaime, he said that even down in Mexico there wasn't much media coverage. So I can't explain it. If it wasn't anything else, it was the largest one-day UFO event in history as far as numbers.
Well, let me prop to this. I think and I won't even use the word skeptics. I'll use the word the debunkers. They have done such a good job in association with the government, specifically the government of the United States, in dismissing the entire UFO phenomenon as being such a taboo topic, that it's a career breaker, that it breaks up families, that no newsman or woman worth their salt is going to risk everything by even covering such a story. So they've done a good job. And as a result, the press, in many ways, have become willing accomplices as to not portraying the UFO phenomena accurately. They go out of their way to, ridicule and discredit the sighting reports, the very witnesses involved. And as a result, this was the ultimate, circus in their mind, in their eyes. The idea that somebody would claim to actually have photographs, have slides of a genuine extraterrestrial. And is it any wonder that especially the American press turned the other way. After all, UFOs can exist in their minds.
Mm-hmm. Now, people were angry, but I want to say too, I was watching things on Facebook, and the people were actually there was a lot of I want to say foul language. There was a lot of anger. There was a lot of people being mean, and I think they were being mean because they basically thought they were being taken for a ride. That's why they were so angry. But I did
not to interrupt you, Martin, because we know where you're going, but I'm sure Tom will concur that in most cases, these were the same people who were attacking us before the slides were released.
Really? Wow.
They were the same people that were just absolutely vicious, foul-mouthed, and their vitriol, it became so personal from the get-go that it didn't matter what we were presenting. It came down to how dare you think that you're going to present any evidence regarding this topic without our involvement, without our approval. You haven't presented, presented this to your peers for review. So we're going to attack you. We're going to destroy it before it even comes out. And I'm sure Tom witnessed the same thing, that most of these people playing Monday morning quarterback were the same ones on the sidelines who weren't only jeering and, assaulting us beforehand, but they were also trying to, in many ways, sabotage the end result before anything ever came out.
Uh-huh.
We were attacked because they said we were taking too long. Can you imagine if we spent just a little bit of time on this and went forward? We were doing due diligence as best we could, given the logistics of who had the slides, where Don was, where I was, and we were called every name in the book. So, what can you say?
Right. I have just been contacted. I've never had to do this before, but my dog is very sick. I think I might have to. I'm going to have to take a break. So if you're listening live, I apologize, and we're just going to take a little bit of a break. I'll be right back. Please, guys, hang in there. I'll be right back in just a few minutes, okay?
Good luck, Martin. I hope the dog's going to be fine.
Yeah, okay. If you if you would like to continue talking, I'm just trying to throw a subject out. This is a little off topic, but Tom, someone did email this question here, and he said that his grandfather was a B-29 pilot for the 509th. Besides Roswell, he was also in Alaska for a few years, starting in the late 1947. He flew reconnaissance RB-29s over the Soviet Union, Project Nanook to be specific. And have you, Tom, ever heard of anything of the UFO related to this area or project? And I'll be right back.
Well, I was in the Air Force, and from 1963 to 1967, and I was sent to remote Alaska. I had requested a European assignment, and they sent me to remote Alaska. And when I got my orders, I said, "How come you're sending me to remote Alaska? I wanted Britain or Germany." And they said, "Well, it looked like you liked northern ways." So they sent me to Alaska. And being remote, of course, we didn't have any newspapers. We did have Armed Forces radio, which was very limited in subject matter. And I was up there for a year in remote. And when I rotated out of Alaska, went through Elmendorf Air Force Base in Anchorage, I bought a couple of newspapers because I wanted to see what was going on in the world. And there on the front page was above the fold was a large photograph of a group of college students looking up at the sky, and there was a big sign that said, "Take me to your leader." And what it was is Alaska was undergoing a UFO flap at that time, which was a large number of reported sightings of UFOs. And it didn't make the news down in the lower 48, as they said, but up in Alaska at that time, while I was up there, they were having a UFO flap that made the front page of the Anchorage News. And whatever became of it, I don't know, and I don't know if the caller's or the emailer's relative was up there at that time or not. So,
well, thanks for keeping this going. I actually do have to take my dog to emergency, so I'm going to have to wrap this up, guys. But I do want to just ask both of you a quick question. First of all, do you think this was a black eye to Roswell or the UFO community or anything like that? And Tom, go ahead first if you would. And if you could do it all over again, what would you do?
Well, fortunately, it's not a black eye to UFOs or Roswell because there wasn't much coverage of it. Thank goodness. So to answer your question, no. And whenever I speak, and I think the same for Don, we expect to get questions on the slides. We never do because nobody knows about them. So in that way, we're relieved. And I don't recall the second part of your question.
If you could do it all over again, what would you do different?
Oh, yeah. If I could do it all over again, I would look at the owners of the slides and Adam Dew much more closely. But the problem was the logistics again. One lived on the West Coast, the other lived in Indiana, I lived in Pennsylvania, and there wasn't a whole lot of interaction that we had. And I should have been more diligent of these gentlemen's backgrounds than I was. And again, I was blown away by the appearance of this body, which to me represented what the witnesses were telling us for so many years.
Okay. And Don, you have a
well, I'm grateful for the fact that at least, in my case, I tried to quickly disassociate the slides from Roswell, that it was a curiosity. It was certainly a keen interest on my part, but, as a separate body, as a separate situation, that whether it could ever be linked to Roswell or anything else, should it have turned out to be legitimate, still would have been rank speculation. But whether it cast a black eye on Roswell, but only because of our involvement, given that we are still the two principal proactive investigators on the case. And for that I regret. For that alone, the fact that we were drawn into something and we still don't have all the answers. And for any of your listeners who still believes that it's so black and white that all we need do is just accept that the slide represents a mummy and nothing else, well, again, it still comes back to how can all these scientists be wrong? How can anyone who has actually examined the body on the slides come away and say, well, it says it's a 2-year-old mummy, but it doesn't look like one? And that's not for me or for Tom or for you or any of your listeners unless they have access to the slides to make such a determination. We accept that we have to, because as it turns out, that will be the final word on the entire slide situation. But there's still a large number of highly qualified people in Mexico in the United States and in Canada who still go, wait a minute, that's not what we see in the slide. So then it comes down to the manipulation. Have the slides been altered? And unless we would have, again, access to the genuine article, I don't know that anybody else is going to be able to make that determination. And that's where I agree with Tom. It still comes back to we should have insisted, we should have pressed more direct access and more additional testing of the actual slides. We relied too much on the honor and credibility of the owners. And each and every time that they provided us with images, we felt we were getting actual images of the slides. And now in reality, we see that we weren't.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you both so much. I really appreciate you coming on the show to talk about this.
Good luck with your dog, and we hope that it turns out all right.
All right. Thanks a lot now.
Yep. Bye.
Good luck. Bye-bye.
Thank you. All right, everyone. So that's it for the show. We'll be back next week. Thanks so much for listening. And sorry I had to cut it short.